Hi guys, in this video I'm going to talk about public goods as a form of market failure, which includes explaining what public goods are and then looking at the ways that the government goes about addressing public goods. But before we get started, let's have a look at market failure in isolation. So for the purposes of this course, market failure is an umbrella term. There are different types of market failure that exist, but they ultimately all have the same problem associated with them. So economists use this market mechanism, because we understand that it leads to the most efficient allocation of scarce resources in the pursuit of satisfying our unlimited wants and needs. Okay, it's the best thing we've got in trying to solve the basic economic problem. And it allows us to come up with equilibrium price and quantity, and then use price signals in the form of relative prices to change the allocation of scarce resources such that our wants and needs are always being maximised, right? But is it perfect? So does it always lead to a situation where our wants and needs are being maximised, where allocative efficiency is being maximised? Well, there's an argument to say that actually no, it doesn't. It doesn't always work, and it in fact is not perfect. So why do markets fail? They fail where the allocation of goods and services as per the market mechanism does not maximise allocative efficiency. So I'm talking about where the wants and needs of the consumer are compromised, okay? And it happens all the time. So we're talking about a situation where there's no government intervention. So think of this sort of hypothetical world, you know, the governments are so involved in our lives, it's kind of hard to separate them. But assume that when we're talking about this particular market here, there is no government intervention, okay? So what condition would our roads be in, as an example, if they weren't managed by the councils or the state government? Would a producer come in and fix that pothole? Why would they? Would they bother fixing that pothole? Like, is there an incentive for them to do that without any type of government intervention? Probably not. What would happen to the number of people smoking if there's no negative advertising? Is it the case that more people would smoke, and then as a result more of us are subjected to secondhand smoking and our hospitals become overrun with people who are sicker? What would happen to the environment if there were no laws preventing pollution? So think about a manufacturing company, for example. If they went unchecked without any kind of laws that stopped them from polluting, what would be likely to happen to the levels of pollution that we're exposed to? And then what negative implications would that have on us? So keep in mind, guys, without any type of government intervention, all these things suddenly become a reality, and we would find that the way that scarce resources are allocated would have incidents of misallocation where our wants and needs aren't being maximised to the best of their ability, okay? So governments have to get involved, essentially, to try and mitigate that. Now, in terms of market failure, I said before, think about it as an umbrella term. There are 4 different types, and this video is going to focus on public goods. So public goods is a type of market failure. What are we talking about? There are 2 conditions that need to be satisfied. The first is that they are non-rivalrous, okay? Note the word rival and what that means. So non-rivalrous means that there's a condition that occurs when someone consuming the good does not prevent someone else from consuming the good or service at the same time. So have a think for a moment, you know, you're at the beach and then someone else comes to the beach. You being at the beach doesn't impede on their capacity to be at the beach in Australia. I know it's not like that around the world, but for most of us, we can all go to the beach and we can all enjoy it at the same time, all right? It's non-rivalrous in terms of its consumption. The flip side of a public good, however, is that it's not excludable. So this is a condition that occurs when someone cannot be prevented from consuming the good or service. So if you think about a traditional good or service that you see in a shop and there's a price point attached to that, unless you're willing to pay that price, you're excluded from consuming that good or service. The problem with public goods, however, is that's not the case. There is no price point to be charged, and as a result, everybody's able to consume it. And so the profit incentive for the producer is either non-existent or extremely low. So with these 2 things combined, the issue with public goods is that it leads to what's known as the free rider problem, when a non-excludable good will not be produced by the free market because no one's willing to pay for it when they think someone else will pay for it, okay? So go back to the pothole in the road example. Why would I pay for that when I believe that someone else is going to pay for that, right? It leads to a situation where particular goods or service are under-allocated in the market, because there is no profit incentive for anybody to produce it. So, quick little multiple choice question here for you. Which one of the following best describes characteristics of a public good? Well, we've just said that they're non-rivalrous and non-excludable, and so we're dealing with D. But you can imagine if you don't have those terms sort of really, you know, clear-cut in your mind, it's very easy to mix this one up. So please make sure that however you are maintaining your notes or creating flashcards or whatever it is, you've got to be really mindful that it's super easy to mix this terminology up, particularly when we look at other types of market failure that also have some of these characteristics. So public goods, non-excludable, non-rivalrous. And here are some examples. So we've got traffic lights, lighthouses, public parks, public schools, defence forces, law and order enforcement. These are all examples of things that you kind of would ask yourself, why would a private producer produce them? Is there an incentive for them to produce them if they are non-excludable and non-rivalrous, right? The short answer is there is no profit incentive, okay? And so because there is no profit incentive, producers simply will not produce the good or service, and as a result, they are under-allocated in the market. So do we need public schools? Do we need law enforcement? Do we need public parks? You know, do these things maximize our wants and needs and ultimately lead to improvements in allocative efficiency? Well, yeah, absolutely they do. I mean, I can't imagine what the roads would look like without traffic lights, you know, or what the state of crime would look like without law enforcement. You know, in terms of living standards, we need these things. But if we were to leave it up to the traditional market to provide them, we would find that they would be under-allocated or non-existent potentially, and that is going to have negative implications on our living standards. So in this multiple choice question, I'm trying to determine which of the following is not considered to be a public good, so keeping in mind that public goods are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. So I'm looking for the odd one out. So a fireworks display. Can I be excluded from consuming it? No, I can't. And does my consumption impact somebody else? No, it doesn't. So it's not A. Street lighting. Can I be excluded? No, I can't. And does my consumption impact somebody else? No, it doesn't. So it can't be B. C. Healthcare services. Can I be excluded? Possibly, if there's a price point attached to it. Healthcare services without government intervention are unlikely to be free. And does my consumption impact somebody else's? Possibly. Well, there's X amount of doctors, so there's a chance that if I'm being seen to, somebody else may not be able to. So C looks good, but checking D, free-to-air TV broadcasts. Can I be excluded from it? Not if I've got a television. And does my consumption impact somebody else's? No, it doesn't. So the answer must be C. Great video to explain the free rider problem and all the issues associated with it. Make sure you watch it in your own time. So ultimately, guys, what's the issue? So due to the free rider problem, there's no profit incentive for producers, leading to an under-allocation of resources towards public goods. So if you think about all these things, without any type of government intervention, there's not enough of them that are going to be created, and that's going to have negative implications on allocative efficiency, okay? As a result, the wants and needs of society are not maximised as resources are not being allocated towards their most efficient use. And that is market failure, okay? So what are the solutions? There's a few different solutions that you need to know. The first one being a subsidy. Now, a subsidy is any amount of money granted by the government to a firm or industry. Its purpose is to reduce the firm's cost of production. So if the government gives money to a company and that company enjoys a decrease in their cost of production, the idea is that they're able to then increase their supply, and that should lead to an increase in the availability of that good or service in the market. So have a think about that for a moment from a supply and demand diagram perspective. The subsidy will shift the supply curve to the right, and if you can imagine what would happen to Q along the x-axis, there would be an increase in the quantity traded. And so we just came and said, okay, well, the issue with public goods is there's not enough of these things being produced. A subsidy is a way that the government can come in and incentivize producers to produce the good or service by basically providing them with the profit incentive that they need. If you produce this thing, we will pay you for it. And therefore there is money that is flowing to the producer, and suddenly there is an incentive for them to produce the good or service. The other alternative is that the government directly provides the public good themselves. So they take on the responsibility of the production of the good or service and ultimately addresses the underallocation of resources by doing it themselves. Okay, so the government takes full responsibility for the supply of the public good. And going back to these examples, you know, one of the best ones is obviously law and order. You know, they're obviously state or national based services, and the purpose of that is to ensure, you know, order in society. You can't expect that a private company is going to do that off, you know, the back of no profit. So the government takes it on and takes responsibility for it, and as such, we enjoy the benefits of that service. So here is a pretty typical question in this space. Explain how the existence of public goods may cause market failure and an inefficient allocation of resources. Describe one example of government action that could be used to correct this. Now, this is, from an economic perspective, this is a big question. There's actually multiple questions in this one question. So don't be fooled and think, oh, you know, a couple of sentences is going to cut it. You really do need to be careful in making sure that you understand where the marks are coming from. So the first part of the question, explain how the existence of public goods may cause market failure, right? That's the first question. Then you need to link that to and an inefficient allocation of resources. So there's two things there that you need to make sure that you're addressing in your response. Then there's a whole new question. You need to describe one example that the government could take to then correct this type of market failure. All right, so here's a suggested outline. Always set the scene. So define the public good, including its conditions, which must be defined. So when you talk about non-excludable and non-rivalrous, you then need to define what that means straight away. Do not use those terms without telling the examiner what they mean. Then you need to link to market failure and an inefficient allocation of resources. For public goods, you can do that through the free rider problem. So really just following through the theory that we looked at in terms of explaining the free rider problem ultimately leads to a lack of profit incentive, which means there's an under-allocation of resources for particular public goods. You could use an example if it helps, and then link that through to the definition of market failure. And that's the first part of the question done, but you've got to keep going. You then need to identify a relevant government action, of which we've just spoken to two of them, and then you need to explain how the government action works, and to do that you need to go back and explain how it corrects the under-allocation of resources. So there's quite a lot of work to do here. Here's a sample response that you can look at in your own time and note how it follows the structure that I had on the other slide. Thanks, guys.